Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Bedtime Fairy Tales. I'm Kim. This story was sent in by the Dungeon Duo Podcast. They're a live play podcast, and you can find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your podcasts. This is the story of how one dragonborn tried to take his luck a little too far. This is Cayde's Blade Escapade. Once upon a time, there were 3 valiant heroes who were in town looking for some new weapons. The party included a dragonborn fighter named Cayde, a human monk named Mori, and a human ranger named 21 Sandwich. Yes, you heard that right. Now these heroes decided to look for the blacksmith shop, since they'd recently discovered that metal weapons are far superior to the cardboard ones they had made themselves. As they stroll through the busy streets and approach the shop, Mori stops the other two and says,
"Guys, wait. Isn't that the same guy we robbed in the last town?"
The other two squint as they take a closer look.
Yeah, actually, I think it is,
says 21 Sandwich. Luckily, our trio was better at stealing than they were with morality, because they had managed to get away with their crime without being spotted before, so there was no danger of being recognized. They were safe to do some honest business this time. You know, if they wanted to. The group scans the masterful weapons, swords, battle axes, javelins, arrows, anything you could want. So they stroll casually up to the blacksmith stall. The blacksmith sees them, puts on his best salesman smile, and says,
"You fellas look like you could use a new weapon of 3. No hero should be caught dead walking around with those shoddy weapons."
Clearly he doesn't notice that the weapons he's insulting had been stolen from him.
"I have here the best weapons money can buy, friends. What are you looking for today?"
Mori and 21 Sandwich stock up on some weapon upgrades, some ammunition, and a few other things they need. Then, Cayde the fighter asks to see the biggest sword they have. The blacksmith smiles and pulls a sheet off the table behind him. Underneath the sheet was a sword. But not just any old sword. A massive sword. A sword so big that even standing at 6'6", the dragonborn still wouldn't be able to wield it. Cayde decides that he has to have this sword. Because you know what they say about men with big swords? They're super intimidating. Cayde asks for a price.
"Well, that's the biggest and best sword money can buy, it is. It's a Swordomatic 2000, guaranteed not to break or lose its shine. It can be yours for the low, low price of 500 gold.
Cayde is shocked.
500 gold?
Cayde didn't have that kind of money. So he starts to brainstorm. They already robbed the guy once, right? They could probably do it again. So he comes up with a plan to get the blacksmith away from his stall.
Say,
says Cayde.
You haven't had anything stolen from you recently, have you?
The blacksmith looks surprised and says,
"Well, as a matter of fact, I have. Why do you ask? Do you know something about it?"
Cayde replies,
Well, I heard some rumors that there's this shady character out behind the stables selling stolen weapons. It came from the stable boy himself, actually, so he would definitely know.
The blacksmith looks angrily towards the stables.
"Behind the stables, you say? Well, I see no reason not to take your word for it. I'll be back in a bit. You boys seem like honorable men. Keep an eye on my stall for me, would you?"
The blacksmith storms off and Cayde smiles triumphantly. He looks at the other two and says,
Come on, guys. Help me get it back to the stagecoach.
"Oh, no.
says Mori.
I don't want any part of this. You've gotten us into enough trouble. You can do this one on your own."
21 Sandwich agrees, and the two go to stand across the street to watch at a safe distance. Cayde struggles to lift the blade off the table. As it slides off, he barely manages to hold onto the hilt as the other end of the sword hits the ground with a clang. Cayde glances around nervously, but most people ignore it and continue about their day. He lets out a relieved sigh and begins dragging the sword through the streets towards their carriage. Meanwhile, the blacksmith finds no one behind the stables and discovers the stable boy has no idea what he's even talking about. He'd been lied to. He hurries angrily back to his stall. When he arrives, he sees his sword and Cayde both missing. He turns towards Mori and 21 Sandwich and says,
"Hey, where'd that dragonborn fella go?"
Maury happily tells him
He went that way.
and points in the direction Cayde had gone. The blacksmith storms off down the road towards Cayde, who sees him coming. He starts to panic a little. The sword is far too heavy to make a run with, and there's no place nearby to stash it. He quickly does what any master thief would do in this situation. He hides it behind his back.
Hey, you!
Yells the blacksmith as he marches up to Cayde.
You took my sword!
Cayde has to think of something fast. Now, if you don't know this already, dragonborns have a breath weapon. This means they can breathe fire, ice, lightning, or various other types depending on their ancestry. Well, Cayde just so happened to have acid breath, and it suddenly occurs to him that he can use it to melt down the sword and escape. Easy peasy. Cayde begins arguing with Blacksmith while trying to sneakily breathe acid over his shoulder to melt the sword.
What? I didn't take your sword. I was just trying to help you. Where would I even be hiding a sword that big?
The blacksmith points at the drag marks on the ground leading from his stall all the way to Cayde.
Oh, yeah?
He says.
Then what's that from?
Cayde feigns offense and says,
That's from my tail. You racist ass.
At this point, the blacksmith notices Cayde constantly looking over his shoulder and quickly sidesteps to see what he has behind his back. He sees his half-melted, prized sword and becomes enraged.
You destroyed my sword, you selfish bastard!
He yells for the guards as he draws back and punches Cayde in the face. Now let me tell you a little bit about this blacksmith. He was tall, he was beefy, and he was very, very strong. He hits Cayde so hard that it breaks his jaw and sends him flying backwards through the air. Cayde lands in a heap. He rolls over and tries to breathe acid at the blacksmith, but since his jaw is broken, he isn't able to control the direction of the acid and he burns himself instead. The blacksmith walks up to Cayde with pure hatred burning in his eyes and punches him a second time. This time, knocking him out cold. All the while, Maury and 21 Sandwich stand back and watch. They weren't about to get caught up in Cayde's shenanigans again. This time, he was on his own. The town guards quickly show up. The blacksmith tells them the whole story, and they arrest Cayde, dragging him off to jail while he was still unconscious. The blacksmith leans down and gathers what's left of his sword. Tears well up in his eyes as he takes his most prized creation back to the shop. The other two shake their heads and go back to shopping. The end. This next story was sent in by Brett G. in North Carolina. In this tale, we go back to basics and learn that things aren't always what they seem. So settle in for It's Not What It Looks Like. Once upon a time, somewhere deep in the woods, a party was getting ready to make camp for the night. The group consisted of a human druid named Darren Stoneback, who had leprosy and a lot of inconvenient farts. A tabaxi monk rogue with a habit of taking things that didn't belong to him called Leaf on the Wind. He probably went by Wash for short, but I'm just speculating. A human priest named Thoradin Clangadin, a human warlock named Corbin, who later turned out to be the big bad evil guy. But that's another story. This story is mostly about a human paladin named Gareth Dawnshield and an orc barbarian named Kronk. Gareth and Kronk were first on watch that night. They stood guard at the edge of the campsite while everyone else tucked in. Gareth and Kronk passed the first hour making jokes about Darren's farts, but then they hear something. It's faint, but there's rustling several yards away. The guys go silent and start creeping into the darkness. Through the dense trees, they begin to make out a horse-like shape. The heroes creep closer as stealthily as possible. But it turns out, plate armor isn't the best attire for being silent. Gareth steps high over a branch and puts his foot down loudly. The shape in the distance turns towards them sharply. They watch in awe as giant silvery wings extend out from the beast. They seem to glow in the moonlight as they tower higher and higher over their heads. Kronk recognizes this creature. He read about them in the library in the Golden Palisades.
Hey, that's a Pegasus!
He exclaims. The heroes know immediately they have to capture this majestic, beautiful creature. The glory alone would be enough, but the benefits of having a flying horse was a good perk too. The Pegasus turns and begins galloping away from them. The heroes take off after it. Gareth grabs for the mane, but his hand is knocked away by the enormous wing. Kronk tries to grab it as well, but finds nothing to grasp hold of. The Pegasus is quickly pulling ahead of them. The heroes are sprinting, trying to keep up, but they see the massive wings starting to flap as the beast prepares to take off. Kronk says,
If it gets in the air, we'll never catch it!
Gareth decides to use his javelin to try and pin it to the ground. He grabs it off his back, uses all of his energy to pick up a little bit more speed, then locks in on the creature's left wing. He draws his arm back and throws the javelin with all his might. But right as the weapon leaves his hand, he trips on a root and face plants. The javelin misses, and Kronk, who is sprinting full speed right behind him, trips over Gareth. The two of them then tumble down a small incline, branches and vines tearing at their clothes and hair. The heroes get up, brush off some of the dirt and disappointment, and walk the few yards back to camp. They arrive panting and sweaty. They're surprised to find the other party members awake and waiting for them. Corbin the Warlock says,
Well, what have you two been up to, eh?
Gareth, thinking the party saw the Pegasus flying out of the forest, says,
It's exactly what it looks like.
The other two snicker as Corbin says,
Look, guys, it's fine if you two want to have some alone time. Just be a little bit more considerate to the others that are trying to sleep, okay?
The two look confused for a moment before simultaneously realizing what Corbin was implying.
No!
It's
No.
not what you
That's
think!
not at all!
The rest of the party laughs.
No, guys. I mean, it's not what it looks like.
Says Gareth.
Yeah,
Kronk exclaimed.
there was this Pegasus!
And we chased it, but it was too fast.
Corbin smirks and says,
Oh, and running a few feet in the forest is what tore your clothes, tousled your hair, and got you all dirty.
Of course not. It started to take off, and I had to stop it. So I threw my javelin to try to pin it.
And then he tripped, and then I tripped, and we were rolling around on the ground.
Corbin cuts in with,
Whoa, man. I don't need all the details. Your private life is your private life. Just try to be a little bit more respectful of our sleep.
No, you don't understand.
cried Gareth.
Yeah, Gareth just screwed it all up with his loud armor and fumbling feet.
Gareth scowls at Kronk and says,
I didn't see you do anything to stop it.
The two argue for a few moments before Corbin interrupts.
Look, guys, it doesn't matter. Just go to bed. And try and get a little sleep while you're there.
He says with a wink. The guys protest again, but the rest of the party was not having it. And they never did. For the rest of their adventures together, the rest of the party never once believed that there had ever been a Pegasus. And that's just part of the reason that to this very day, Gareth still isn't remorseful for later killing Corbin. But like I said, that's another story. The end. Thanks for listening. To submit a fail, email me at bedtimefairyfails@gmail.com or message me on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram as Bedtime Fairy Fails and Twitter as BT Fairy Fails.